Hello, I'm Reverend Scott Wipperman, pastor here at First Presbyterian Church in Helena, Montana, and we welcome you to our worship service today. I'd like you to know that regardless of who you are or where you are in your journey of faith, you're welcome here at First Presbyterian Church.
Gospel reading today comes from the Gospel of Luke, beginning with 9:28. You can find this on page 1609 in your pew Bibles. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." He did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and told no one at that time what they had seen. The next day, when they came down from the mountain, a large crowd met them. A man in the crowd called out, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only child. A spirit seizes him, and he suddenly screams. It throws him into convulsions, so that he foams at the mouth. It scarcely ever leaves him, and is destroying him. I begged your disciples to drive it out, but they could not." "O unbelieving and perverse generation," Jesus replied, "how long will I stay with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." Even while the boy was coming, the demon threw him to the ground in a convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the evil spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And they were all amazed at the greatness of God. The word of the Lord. Just before this, in Luke, Jesus has been talking with the disciples and telling them for the first time that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer and be rejected and die. Now, the disciples didn't seem to get it. You notice, if you read that part of the Bible, there's no "say what" that you might expect if someone just told you that they were about ready to go off and be killed. But that's what's leading up to this. And now we come to this passageway. My sister, Susan, who's a few years older than I, went skiing in Colorado one year. When she came back, she told me that they had been skiing on the back side of the mountain, and a big storm came in. It started snowing, the wind was blowing, and the temperature was dropping quickly. And they had to ski down the back side and the rest of the way down the back side of the mountain to get to the lifts at the bottom, and then ride a very slow and chilly ride up the lift because the lift had to run at a slower speed due to the winds. And by the time they got to the top, they were very cold. And they got off and they skied a little ways to get to the point where they could ski down the front side of the mountain, down to the lodge down below. And my sister said she could see how it would be very easy just to sit down and go to sleep. She was cold, not just your fingers and your toes cold, cold through your whole body. And she said it'd be so easy just to have sat down and gone to sleep, and most likely never have woken up. Sleep comes about a lot in Luke, in the Gospels. Sleep and death are linked together. There's many times in the Gospels where it speaks about someone being asleep, like Jairus' daughter, where she has really died, and then Jesus brings her back to life. Many times, someone who is dead is said to be asleep. And maybe this is the disciples' confusion. Maybe this is why they don't react with a "say what?" when Jesus tells them that he's going to die, because they're thinking he's going to sleep. Kind of the reverse situation of that analogy. But Jesus takes them up on the mountaintop. And what do the disciples do? They fall asleep. Disciples do this quite well throughout the Gospels, falling asleep with Jesus, particularly when Jesus is praying. Maybe Jesus needs to say more exciting prayers or something, I don't know, but the disciples do this all the time. And the argument could be that the disciples were very tired. They just climbed to the top of a mountain after all. Maybe they needed some rest and some sleep. Some commentators argue that it wasn't so much tiredness that got to the disciples. It was the ever-present pressures of the fear of things like death. I mean, they were going with Christ, and they had seen thousands fed from a few loaves. They'd seen people coming asking for healing and being healed, but the need was always present. There was more that wanted to be healing. The crowds were always there. Maybe it was just too much pressure. Maybe they needed escape from this, from the fears of death and what they were seeing. I mean, they had been almost shipwrecked with Jesus. A lot had been on them. And so the timing in this story is a little unusual. We hear they went up to the top of the mountain. We hear that Jesus' face began to glow, and his clothes became not just brighter, they became like lightning, emitting light. And we hear that Elijah and Moses showed up and were speaking with Jesus about his departure. Nice euphemism for death, for crucifixion. And then we hear that the disciples were sleeping. Were they sleeping through all of this? Had they heard any of what Jesus was talking about with Moses? Or did they just suddenly wake up and see Jesus with his glowing face and his bright clothes, and Moses and Elijah standing there with Jesus? Luke says that they were asleep, and then they became fully awake. What did they know? What did they hear? Sleep to awake, dark to light. These are contrasts that appear throughout the Bible. We sleep when it's dark. We awaken when it's light. We walk around in the dark and we stumble upon things. In the light, we can see them and we can stay safe. And light plays into this reading, right? Jesus was glowing. His face was radiant. His clothes were bright. In the text that we read from Paul, he's referring back to the time that Moses came down from the mountain and his face was glowing. And he had to put a veil over his face because it either scared the people so much or they were so distracted looking at his radiant face that they didn't hear a word of what he was saying. But for one of the two reasons, he put a veil over his face. Have you ever seen anyone with that kind of radiance? Seen anyone that was glowing like that. When I was in seminary in Austin, Texas, my home church was in Wimberley, which is about an hour southwest of Austin. And I would stay on campus during the week as opposed to making the hour commute back and forth each day. And one of the parishioners of my home church in Wimberley, Texas, was going into surgery one week to have his heart valve repaired. He was a 70-year-old man, but he was very fit. This seemed to be a minor operation. And the day after the surgery, I went to the hospital, to the heart center, to see him. And they couldn't find his name on the registry. Maybe I had the wrong hospital. Unfortunately, I knew I didn't. And I knew what his name not being on the registry meant. That night, after a successful work on his heart, some complications occurred and he had passed away. That weekend, when I got back in town to Wimberley, back home, and went to church, I spoke with our pastor, Ann, and her husband, Jim. And they said that they had gone over to Bill's house the night before the surgery. And they had talked with him, and he was in good spirits. And they had went outside to pray. Wimberley was far enough away from Austin that you could see the stars in the sky. And it was a clear night, and they said they were standing there under all these stars. And they prayed for Bill. And they said there was this unbelievable peace that seemed to be upon all of them. And Jim said that he noticed that there seemed to be this blue glow around Bill. He didn't know what to make of it at the time. But that next Sunday when I was talking to him, he said, now I know what that blue glow was. God was with Bill. Bill was radiant because of God's presence. Moses was radiant because of God's presence. Jesus was radiant because of God's presence. So Paul tells us a few things about the light. He says, do things in the light. Conduct your business in the light. Conduct your ministry in the light. In the light, in the truth of God, so that all can see it. And don't try bagging God's truth into the darkness and then twisting it and distorting it and somehow and trying to make it say something else. Don't do that. Because, one, it won't work. The truth of God will always shine out, regardless of what we try to do to hide it or change it or distort it. At times, humanity has worked in distorting the truth of God, but always, always, the light has come back out and shown our wrong ways. And so he says, let us not be deceitful, but let us show the truth, hold the truth up, and God's light will be with us, shining from us. Now, if you notice, and if you read this story in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, in Matthew and Mark, it says after 6 days, and the after is after Jesus told them about having to be killed, about his crucifixion. After 6 days, they went up on the mountain. But in Luke, it says after 8 days, they went up on that mountain. And what's significant about 8 is it's a week and the next day. It's the Holy Week and the resurrection on Monday. Christ was taking these disciples up on the mountain to show them this truth. You don't know what the disciples thought. They might have thought it was, okay, it's somewhat honor here. Jesus is picking the 3 of us to go up on the mountain and pray with them. We must be doing something good. But what were they expecting? We're going to go up on this mountain and we're going to pray. And Jesus is going to say one of his long prayers again, and we're going to have to sit through this whole thing. But they get up there, and it's all different. Jesus is showing them the light the truth, the reality that death will be defeated in his resurrection, that death no longer has a claim on them. They are walking into his light. Luke wants us to get this, that Christ is bringing about the message, the truth, the light of life, life given abundantly and eternally, and that death has no hold on us. There's no need to fear that. So when we're sleepy, when we're feeling burdened by what's going on in this world, just remember that Christ has already won, and death is no more, that life is abundant and eternal if we'll just face the light. There's a hymn, Jesus, Take Us to the Mountain. And this hymn asks two questions in the two of the verses. It asks, what do you, Jesus, want us to see there that your close companions saw? So what does Jesus want us to see as Jesus takes us up the mountain to his light, to his truth? And in the next verse, it says, what do you want us to hear there that your disciples heard up on that mountain when we're up there? So Jesus wants us to go to the mountain of light, to see his truth, to stand in his light, to become radiant and have it shine forth from us so that others may be infected, may be shined on by this light and this truth. And then Jesus wants us to come down from that mountain and live with him on his journey towards Jerusalem, as we're about to do in our journey through Lent. So let us go through Lent shining with radiance from the light of Christ and God, from God's truth.